Welcome to today's webinar on IronCAD's piping module. I'm Kerry O'Connor. I'm the Senior Vice President of Product and Strategy, and today we'll be talking about a series of topics including what the piping module is and who the targeted audience is. We'll give you an example of the piping module and how it can be used. Then we'll talk about the release plans for the piping module, including the pre-release that's included in Sarvers Pack 1 and our formal release, which will be included in our product update release in April. Then we'll discuss for the pre-release how to enable the piping module and talk about the current content that's been created for the pre-release that you can use to trial the functionality, and then some of the rules that's used in the piping content. And then we'll talk about the limitations on the pre-release module so that you have an idea of all the limitations before we get to the final release. So let's go ahead and hop into this webinar, and we'll first talk about what the piping module is. Okay, the IronCAD piping module is a new module that's developed into IronCAD that gives you access to toolboxes of industry standard components. The piping module itself will have included components for various standards, including ANSI, ISO type standards. You can also use the toolbox to build your own components with your own rules and requirements. The other key thing about our piping module is it has an automatic routing and splitting capability, where you can insert components and it automatically splits the route. For example, like inserting T components, crosses, things like that on your piping runs, that will automatically split the run and insert the component. But you can also do automatic routing, so you can basically point to your starting point and your end point, and it'll give you various options to route to those locations to give you an optimal result. Lastly, the piping module is fully dynamic, meaning that when you create a run and make modifications, all the components attached will automatically move and adjust to those modifications. For example, if you change the length of a pipe run, all the components attached will move on the end conditions to satisfy the change. This module is really designed to streamline the piping design process and to give you accuracy and capabilities that are a little bit more difficult to create in standard modeling. So let's hop into an example and show you how this can be done. So in our case, we're going to use this model to basically show you how we can create that purple pipe run in the IronCAD piping module. So let's hop over to IronCAD and we'll go ahead and show you that process. Okay, here we are in IronCAD. So in our file, we are actually in a millimeter unit. So we're going to use an ISO standard to build our pipe run. And we're basically going to start at our flange down here, and we're going to create a pipe run up to our top pipe of our tank. So when you enable the piping, you'll see a new ribbon bar that you can add to your current ribbon bar set. In our case, we already have it added here. And we're going to actually start with the create pipe function, which will open up our toolbox browser that we mentioned earlier that allows you to actually create any components. So this is our piping route that is standard and specific to the pipe runs and have specific meanings and specific nodes to do this. But you can also create and modify these just by going in and configuring these to add your own toolbox repository that you can add your own parametric parts. For example, if you wanted to add components into there that will have a similar behavior when you drag and drop out to allow you to select variables, this is one way to do that with the toolbox. But the piping is what we're talking today, so let me go ahead and show you a little bit about that. So as I mentioned, the pre-release already has a sample set of data, which includes ANSI, ISO, and some GB files. So you can see the sets here, and mainly these consist of pipe crosses. There's elbows, flanges, reducers, T's, and a pipe tube, for example, for a simple pipe inside of here. So that's kind of the standard concept for the ANSI and the ISO side. And this is currently built off of welded components. So most of the ones that you'll see here are standards for welded pipe. So in our case, we are going to work with the ISO side, and we're going to start with that flange. So we're just going to select onto our flange. We have two here that are available to us, and let's kind of zoom in here. What we're going to do is drop right onto the location with our weld neck flange, and we're going to drop it right on that center point inside of there, and now you'll be presented with a browser that allows you to select the various standards. In our case, we have DN standards that we can set in here. We can start with it, maybe we'll go up to 65 and see how big that is, which is a pretty good mix there, but we can see that the pipe, inner pipe, is a little too large for that, even if we're at the lowest pressure rating size here. So let's go ahead and change that down a little bit, and maybe we can just up that up a little bit if we need to get the right pressure. So that's a better size for our pipe. Inside of there, let's change our pressure to maybe 6 here to see if that will update. Maybe we'll go to 10, see if that's a better size. That's a better fit for that, and it also lines up with our holes. So we'll use that one as our flange that we're going to use inside of there. So that's our starting point inside of there. And I'm just kind of sorry about this. I'm kind of moving this around here so we can see it a little bit better inside of there. So now we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And this will take us into our pipe settings. So in our case, we have a pipe that's going to be set for that 50 size DN that we selected for our flange. And then we have series inside of here. So this is basically your thickness on your pipe. So you can set different thicknesses for your pipe to select that. If you have other tubes besides our basic tubes, like if you had a threaded one, you can choose different tube types here. This will be fixed, that it'll be a single path here, but right now it's a double. You just have to pull this out to see that full path. That's where it's related to. And then you can add certain things like your bends and or your elbows. So if you want to use a bend that just creates a pipe using regular bend, like a sweep bend, if you will, you can use that. Or if you have elbows, you can select that, and you can also choose that. By default, it'll go to the 90 for the particular standard that you started with, which is in our case ISO. So it's going to use the 90s for the ISO, which we'll use that as our standard. So we'll go ahead and hit OK to apply that. And now it'll actually start us into our what we call the 3D curve mode. In this case, it's really just talking about line geometry. And we already have a starting point here for our curve, which we're going to use that as our starting point, and we're going to actually use another line up here. So we're just going to zoom in here, go to our line command on our ribbon bar, and we're going to pick that starting point as well. And you can see this is similar to our 3D curve, which if you see the arrows there, it's got a X and Y. You can hit tab to change your arrow directions if you're trying to go different directions. In our case, we just want to come out of that pipe a little bit, and we can change it not orthogonal or orthogonal if you like, so that it only goes in certain directions in our case. In our case, we want it to come straight off this pipe, so we're going to pull this out a little ways, and we can hit escape because we just only want a single line. And when we select this, we can also type in what the value is. So this maybe we'll say that's 250 for our length, hit enter, that will adjust that line. So that gives us our lines for our start and our end, and now we can do the auto route. On the ribbon bar, you'll see this command, auto route, and we're just going to essentially pick our start point and our end point, and it's going to give you a path for that. So this gives you a path based on using a YZX path, but you can change these to various other ones. So if you want to change this to try a different direction, that'll remove that section and change another path. That seems like a better path for what I want to do, and I can just go ahead and hit OK. That's what we want to run inside of there. And what it's going to do is going to swap out those bends instead of using regular bends and put our elbows on there, which are the yellow colored, and then the pipe runs. And you'll see in our tree it actually creates this nice pipe run inside of here, which gives you the route information, the components that are being used inside of there. So you can see we've got 3 elbows and the weld neck flange, and then our route parts, which is just basically the pipes. This is all used when you create your drawing. That's going to be your bill of material information for that components inside of there. So that's a simple way to use this tool to build an auto route inside of there. If you want to add other components in this, you have to be in the route edit mode. So to do that, for example, if we want to make a T on this guy, we can select on this part, and we can right click and say edit pipe route, or we can do that on the ribbon bar as well. Either way, you can edit that. Okay, now that we're in the pipe route edit, we can go back to our catalog browser and select other things. For example, we can select a T, and we can simply drag and drop that onto the curve. Once we drag and drop that on there, it'll tell us that we're using a specific standard, which we've already used on our pipe, and it also gives us our series that we're using. And we'll go ahead and hit OK. And when we hit OK, that'll orient the curve, the T, to our line correctly and change it to a yellow color because it's a new component. We can select our line if we want to orient this guy or pull that line or change its length. We can do either one. In our case, we want to orient that, so we're going to turn on our triball, and we can use a triball to align to this existing pipe. Inside of here, we want to rotate that, so we want to lock that axis here and make this perpendicular to our top face or floor, whichever one we wanted to use in this case. Now that we have that, we can hit escape out of there, and if you hit in the background or hit OK, that will exit that command. So that will just create your component inside of there, but if you wanted to edit again, you can always right click and go back to the route edit mode. In this case, maybe we want to change this line to be a little bit longer. Maybe we'll change it to 300 inside of there. We can do that, and that will adjust our pipe. Now, again, you can use this auto route at any time. For example, if we want to change, while we're in the edit mode, we want to add another component down here. We can do the same thing. We can zoom in down here, go back to our flanges, drag and drop a flange onto this component. I don't have a center point, so I can just hold the shift key down and select that center point. I'll connect it. And we'll just use the same flange for now in our case. And go ahead and hit, this was a 10, I believe. There we go. We'll go ahead and set that, hit OK. and we'll just use that default pipe there. And now we can do the auto route again. We can just select our point and our point, and it'll do that pipe route run. In this case, that might not be the desired direction because it's kind of going into my floor there. I can see that. And so let's go ahead and change that to a different path inside of there. So it'll redo that to the Y path. That looks like a better route for us, and we'll go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so that's an example of how this can be used inside of here, and this will update again, creating all the components that you've used in that run. So let me zoom in a little bit here so we can see this a bit better inside of there, so you can see all the components are created for you. They're colored in there so you can tell them that it's part of this pipe route. Again, this is a specific component that we create, so you can actually add this to other assemblies. If you want to drag and drop it into an assembly or assemble it and add other components, you can do so as well inside of there, and you can continue to work like you do with IronCAD's components and our assemblies inside of there. Now, other components can be added to this. Again, reducers can be added, crosses, elbows. You can even use some sort of custom components for like an end cap and like a stub end to add to an end of a pipe. You can do that very easily by just drag and dropping that on there. Some things that may not update in the current version, when you change the link, they may not update with that, but we will fix that for the official release. But that gives you a quick overview of the pipe run capabilities. And again, this can be created into the drawing. The bill of material will be created for all your components. And a lot of these components already have some naming conventions inside of here. If you look at the part properties, it's using the formulas to pull parameter information like the parameter that you picked for the DN inside of there. And also maybe the pipe type in some of these cases for like your pipes and things like that, or your elbows. It'll pick those series as well for that. So there's some things that we're still improving on that, especially to support text-based parameters to be used in these components. So those are some things that we'll fix in the official release, but you can get an idea how this is going to work in the pre-release version. And so all those things will be called out in the bill of material on the drawings. And if you use our drawings, we have two types of drawings. One is the ICD, which can be used to create this in the bill of material. If you use CostaDraft, there's also an option to create the pipe route, which will actually draw the center line for all the pipe run components so that you can dimension that center run or center points and center lines of these components in the drawing. Okay, so that was a good example of how the piping can be used in IronCAD, and a quick overview of what's currently available in the piping module. So let's hop back over to our presentation. And let me go down a slide here. Okay, so the release plans for the IronCAD piping module. So currently in the IronCAD 2025 SP1, the module is available, and it, as a pre-release state, basically what I showed you today is available in the current version. This is basically targeted to allow you to start testing and becoming familiar with the application, seeing how the toolboxes can be used, and allows us time to add additional standards for the official launch. We'll also continue to develop the components to refine and add some more improvements to the usability of the product. Our IronCAD 2025 release is officially targeted to release in the April timeframe, and that will include all the components that you see here, all of our improvements, and will also include some more components to the standards, which is also not limited to these, only ANSI, ISO, and GB. We may add other standards to the release for the PU1 release. And then as we can continue to develop going forward for like our 26th release, we'll add more components and continue to grow this piping module. So how do you enable the piping release module? So there are a few steps that you have to do inside of here to do that. One, you need to add a registry key. So if you go into your registry editor, that's just going to your start menu, typing the registry editor inside of there, you can add a new keyword inside of there, which is a D-word type called test piping. You can see in this image, it's in this current location. It's the current user, software IronCAD, and 27 is our 2025 release version. And under internal options, you'll add that test piping D-word component, and then you're going to set the value to 1 and hit OK. So that's one thing you have to do on the registry side. Then you'll need to enable the piping ribbon bar in the UI customization. So if you go into IronCAD's interface, right click up on your kind of like the gray area of your ribbon bar, you can go to the customize ribbon, which is located here. And then you'll see the piping module sitting here on your left-hand side, and then you can select to add over to your right-hand side, which is your ribbon bars, and then you can right-click on these modules to move, or any of these components, to move it up and down, so basically shifting the position of where it is on our ribbon bar. So you can just move that to where you like to use it, and then you'll have access to the piping module. One note is once you add this registry key, you do need to restart IronCAD or set this when IronCAD's closed, then start up IronCAD, and then this will be visible. Okay, so those are the 2 steps that you need to do to get this added to the ribbon bar. And next, one thing that we wanted to talk about was in the pre-release again. So currently what you saw in this version are essentially the flanges are your main starting point, or you can start with elbows and crosses and reducers as well, or T's. You can start with any one of those, but usually flanges are the ones that you will start off with, and you add your runs to those. But anyways, you can add any one of these to start off with. But we include the flanges, a few different types of flanges for each standard. We have some elbows in there for the 90s and 45s. T's, we have a regular T and a reducing T. Crosses, same thing. We have a standard cross, and I believe we have a reducing cross in there as well. And we have just some standard reducers. And currently, the reducers that we have are concentric reducers. We don't have the eccentric reducers in this version, in the pre-release version. You also have some other additional content, as mentioned or I showed in the demonstration, that we have some for caps and stubs, and we'll potentially add some more components for threaded components in our PU1 release and other standards like the Korean standard, DN standard, GIS standards, things like that we can add as we continue to develop on this. So those are some things to look forward in the PU1 content, and some other things with those caps and stubs. In the PU1 release, we'll make sure that they do size and move when you change the pipe runs. That's one of the plans for the improvements. Some things to note about the piping are some of the rules. So this is a list of all these. I'm not going to go through all these in the webinar, but I'll just kind of talk to these so you know some of these things when you're dealing with this. Currently, the piping is a very specific folder type, so that you saw the piping route folder that is very specific and coded to that, so that those are recognized as crosses, elbows, flanges, reducers, and T's. So they have some specific names on those folders and stuff like that. So creating new content for you may not be beneficial to try in the pre-release version because we have these certain standards right there, but we'll make that easier to use in the PU1 release so that you can create your own components going forward. So that's kind of one of the benefits of our product, and the way we're going to do this is allow you to create your own components. So if we don't have a certain type of component that you need, you can download the information and create your own component with the next point here is the route points and connection points. So when you add these route points and connection points, it'll know how to connect to an existing route or create a route with piping connection points to build the piping needs. So we'll show you in the PU1 release, we'll show you how to do that, because in the SP1 side of things, it may not be beneficial to start doing that because we will be making improvements for that. And when you're using the routes and connection points, there are specific orientations to use those. So that's another thing that will help and try to improve and show documentation on that when we get to the official release stage. As I mentioned, the eccentric reducers are not included in the SP1. We also have some matching conditions. This is really more from the development side of things. So when you're creating these, if you have very specific standards like the DN standard, or for ANSI, maybe using NPS as the naming, you can define the matching conditions of what to use, whether you use DN or NPS, series or schedules, however you use the naming conventions. We have a way for using an XML file to determine that. We also have these data sets for each one of the piping, which I didn't show you in the demonstration, but each one of those pipe components have a data set. So you have think of it as an Excel spreadsheet that has all the components in there. They're variables that drive all that information. So the size, the DN standards or NPS standards, the schedules or series, they're all listed in that table and define all the values for that. So that's the data sets that are in there, and we have specific rules for how that data set gets created. So that's some things we'll talk when we get to the official release of the product, so that you have a clear idea of how to build those data sets. Some of the rules when you're building this data is really kind of the pipes are built to be sweep paths. So if you looked at some of our other components in IronCAD that might already have some piping components, they might be extrudes, but that's not how this is being based off of, because we can actually sweep that path. So we're using a sweep to do that for our extrudes, or for our pipes. We also have this toolbox data, and by default we have a program files location for that we copy into our local app data folder. That's kind of specifically what we do for a lot of our things, like our UI XMLs for the ribbon bars and things like that. We copy into our local app datas or roaming app data folders. So these are useful for when you create your own standards. You can have your own data set that's there, and you can copy that around to other machines to be used. So if you build your own components, for example, you can take your toolbox from that local data folder, app data folder, copy it onto other users or shared users' machines, and they can all have the same components inside of there. So that's a very nice way that we can transfer that data around. We also have some various other rules here that I'll mention, that we have some cache files and XML files that are part of the piping components that you just need to be aware of when you get into moving things around or creating the components. And as I showed in the demonstration, the part property formulas can be used to drive the component names based on those parameters, which is very handy, so you can actually have the same information in your bill of material. And again, all these variables in the data sets are really parameters that are driving the information. And currently the text parameters I mentioned early on is not supported, but we will support those in the PE1 release so that you can get the full naming that you need. So for example, schedules have not only just numbers inside of there, they have like a 10s or 40s is in there as well, so it can't be a length parameter or a scalar parameter. We have to actually use a text parameter to drive that. So that's what we need to use for our PE1 to support that. Okay. Some of the limitations, so I mentioned some of these in the rules inside of there, but we are currently in this SP1 pre-release module. There are limitations of what the components that are there, so what you have accessible to you is all we have right now, and we probably don't recommend you trying to create other components because they may not work or associate properly in the SP1 release. But we'll give you details on the official release on how to do that so you can start adding your own components. And we'll also improve the usability, and some of the limitations that we mentioned will officially be resolved in our PE1 release. And these other things I mentioned inside of here is just like your connection points, all that stuff is really applied to our PE1 release, that those will all be resolved, but just wanted to highlight those as some of the limitations on the pre-release module. We also have some details that we've been given to our reseller partners on how to create this content. So if you are interested in starting to create content and seeing how it's done, please feel free to contact IronCAD support or our resellers, and they can help show you how to do that. But again, SP1, we're kind of holding back on that just because there are some rules and limitations on that. Once we get to the official release, you'll be able to do that, and we'll have more documentation on that. So again, thank you for participating in our webinar today, and I know there was a series of questions asked in the presentation, so we'll send those responses back to you in our email list, our follow-up emails. We'll send those answers to those, and we'll also send any additional information out to everyone that participated in this webinar, and to give you kind of idea of all the questions that were asked and some of the answers to those, and any other relevant information. So we will follow up with you on that. So again, thank you so much for participating today and joining in our webinar, and hopefully we'd like to hear your feedback on the piping module and see if you enjoy using the new module in your designs. Thank you again.